I was in this strategy meeting last week. You know, the kind fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee, and that one guy at the whiteboard just throwing out buzzwords.
Oh, yeah.
Synergy, disruption, leveraging assets. The energy was just frantic, you know, everyone trying to talk over everyone else, desperate to fill the silence, to like shine. And in the corner, there was this woman from the data team, Maria. She hadn't said a word for maybe 40 minutes.
Just observing.
Exactly. Not checking her phone, not even nodding, just watching. The air was so thick with all this noise, all this effort.
Yeah.
Finally, the manager, almost as an afterthought, goes, "Anything to add, Maria?" And the room went quiet, but it was that impatient kind of quiet, you know? Waiting. Yeah. And she just looked at the board, paused for maybe a second, and said maybe 15 words, something really calm like, "We're all looking at the wrong problem. The data shows the entire premise is flawed." It wasn't loud. She didn't raise her voice at all. But it was like a tuning fork had been struck. The entire vibration of the room just instantly changed.
Right through it.
Yeah, all that frantic noise just collapsed. She hadn't tried to occupy the space, you know. But with one sentence, she'd completely altered its gravity. It really made me realize there are people who don't shout. They like resonate. And in a world that confuses noise with life, their frequency feels like the only thing that actually matters.
That anecdote is, well, it's a perfect encapsulation of what we're diving into today. It really is.
Yeah.
We're digging into the science and the strategy behind authentic resonance, those subtle frequencies that really matter. In a world just saturated by noise and digital static,
Right.
It's not about just generating volume. It's about aligning frequency. Our deep dive today is really focused on uncovering the mechanisms underneath it all, the neurological, the physical, even the architectural systems that define genuine coherence, how we find that clear signal in all the chaos.
Okay, let's definitely unpack this, because that whole idea of cutting through noise, it has to start with intentional communication.
Right.
And presence.
Absolutely.
We live in this, I don't know, this relentless loop of attention overload, multitasking, 24/7 digital connection. It's just this constant siren call of distraction that completely fragments our focus.
Yeah.
Makes true listening feel almost impossible sometimes.
That is the modern struggle, isn't it? And
Yep.
that's exactly why we have to prioritize mindful interaction, mindful communication. It just means applying those core mindfulness principles like setting intentions, being present, really listening, relating with compassion to how we interact.
It's a conscious choice.
It's a deliberate shift, yeah. Moving away from just reacting to everything towards responsive, authentic engagement.
I think we sometimes forget how much internal work, goes into just showing up externally. The research seems to suggest that mindful preparation isn't just about feeling less stressed yourself. It's actually vital for professional success.
Well, absolutely. The foundational step really is setting intentions. Before any critical meeting or a negotiation or maybe a tough conversation, you need to literally spell out what you're aiming for.
Like define the win.
Sort of. Are you trying to present something controversial with clarity and confidence? Or maybe you're mentoring someone and your real intention is to give direct, respectful feedback, but rooted in empathy. If you don't anchor yourself with that intention first, you just walk into the conversation ready to react. And that inevitably just adds more noise.
Okay, so intention is the anchor. Then presence. That's the ship itself. It feels like the superpower we keep losing to our phones or screens.
Precisely. And presence requires that disciplined act of active listening, which means, more than just waiting politely for your turn to speak.
Right, you're actually processing.
You need to focus intensely on the speaker, not just their words, but their whole nonverbal communication, eye contact, posture. Are they leaning in or pulling back? Subtle shifts in their voice even. These nonverbal cues are this massive stream of critical data points that we totally miss when we multitask or glance at our screens or just spend the whole time drafting our brilliant response in our head instead of actually listening. Mindful listening really promotes deeper understanding and connection because you're engaging the full picture without the usual distraction or judgment.
So if presence is the foundation for taking in all that data, then maybe the strategic use of silence, that's the tool for actually processing it. The research you mentioned about silence and negotiation is genuinely counterintuitive. My gut reaction would be that pausing silently makes you look weak, maybe uncertain.
That is the classic high-pressure default thinking, isn't it? But studies looking at negotiation strategy actually reveal pretty much the opposite. Pausing silently during negotiations tends to improve outcomes for both parties involved.
Both. Okay, how?
It's a mechanism for value creation. essentially.
How does that work, though? How does stopping the flow suddenly make things better, not worse?
Well, the mechanism seems to be psychological. Silence shifts the mindset away from what researchers call fixed pie thinking.
Okay, fixed pie. Like there's only so much to go around.
Exactly. That zero-sum default. The belief that any gain for one person must mean an equal loss for the other. When you pause, you kind of interrupt that anxious loop. It forces a shift toward a more deliberative mindset.
Ah, okay. So instead of just defensively trying to protect your little slice of the pie, that silent beat gives you the cognitive space needed to step back and look at the whole picture.
Exactly right. It's like an enforced moment of resourcefulness. So, for example, imagine two companies negotiating a supply contract price. Fixed pie thinking just says, if I lower my price, I lose money. Simple. But a deliberative pause might let one negotiator realize the real value isn't just the price per unit. Maybe it's securing a multi-year exclusive license or leveraging the supplier's logistics network for something else. The silence lets the underlying needs, not just the demands stated out loud, surface. And negotiators who initiate that silence, they're significantly more likely to spot opportunities that actually expand the overall value for both sides.
That is genuinely fascinating. Silence as a catalyst for creative resourcefulness. But you mentioned a critical caveat, right? This doesn't work universally.
Yes, and this is where the whole dynamic of power becomes crucial. If a low-status person, let's say a recent grad negotiating salary with a high-status recruiter, if they initiate the silence, the benefits basically vanish.
Really?
In fact, it can sometimes even be detrimental.
Wait, why? If silence leads to deliberation, shouldn't that benefit the recruiter too? Maybe they could think of a more creative compensation package.
Logically, yes, it should. But the research suggests that when there's already a status imbalance creating tension in the room, the silence doesn't breed constructive deliberation. It seems to breed uncomfortable fixation on that tension that's already there.
Ah.
So the high-status person might interpret the pause as, disrespect, hesitation, maybe lack of confidence, and that interpretation overrides any cognitive benefit from the quiet moment. It basically confirms your earlier point. If the context is defined by power dominance rather than mutual respect, silence can get weaponized or just misinterpreted. Its strategic value gets neutralized.
Okay, so context is absolutely everything. Which brings us back to Maria in your opening story. Her use of silence felt heavy, right? Not passive at all. It demonstrated that concept of harmonique du silence, that authentic resonance over just loud noise and leadership.
That's the perfect organizational application. Think about that high-pressure ad agency you described. They just lost their biggest client. The noise was sheer panic, right? Shouting half-baked ideas, the blame game starting up. That noise was a complete misalignment of frequency, total chaos.
And Maria's stillness, her active silence, it was like this singular low-frequency signal that instantly shifted the whole environment.
Her quietness was, in itself, a challenge to the panic. And when she finally spoke, almost whispering, they aren't angry, they're bored, she delivered the singular, authentic insight.
Ah, that's brilliant.
The client didn't leave because the agency was incompetent. They left because the work had become predictable, stale. That authentic signal which she extracted just through patient observation and silence let the team immediately switch gears. From panic mode, which is just noise, to clarity and actual strategy. That's resonance.
That specific insight, the difference between perceived anger and actual boredom, that feels key. It shows that true resonance means identifying the actual frequency of the problem, not just reacting to its loudest symptom.
Exactly. And this really validates that sentiment captured by Marguerite Duras. There are silences that are absolute weapons. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of everything that matters underneath. Clarity, leverage, authenticity.
Yeah.
It demands attention precisely because it refuses to conform to the surrounding frantic frequency.
Okay, that shift from strategic silence in a boardroom to this deep, almost internal synchrony within relationships. This is where the science of resonance gets really interesting, right? We're moving now from external strategy to what's literally happening under the surface, inside our brains, our bodies.
We shift now to what you might call the invisible language of connection. And it's fundamentally driven by synchrony. The most complex example is probably neural synchrony, sometimes called interbrain coupling.
Okay, lay that out for us, because it sounds a bit like science fiction, but this is real, measurable correlation between brains.
It is. It's the correlation of brain activity patterns across two or more people over time. So imagine two brains where the neural spikes and troughs start kind of mimicking each other in rhythm. This phenomenon represents the actual convergence of their neurocognitive systems. And researchers increasingly see it as the neural basis for shared experiences, whether that's effective communication, deep coordination on a task, or even empathy.
So my brain isn't just passively listening to you. It's actively, functionally linking up with yours in a way we can actually quantify. How on earth do researchers measure that real-time link between two separate skulls?
They use multi-brain imaging techniques. Collectively, it's often called hyperscanning.
Hyperscanning, okay.
This involves simultaneously measuring the brain activity of two or more people while they interact, or maybe even just experience the same stimulus, like watching a movie. The techniques often use EEG, tracking electrical activity, or sometimes fMRI, which tracks blood flow changes. The real magic, though, is in the analysis. They use something called intersubject correlation, or ISC.
Intersubject correlation. Can you give us a simple metaphor for that?
Think of it maybe like comparing two complex musical scores being played at the same time. ISC analysis looks for where the notes and rhythms of your brain activity are lining up with mine, not just for a split second, but over a period of time. It identifies where the spatial and temporal patterns of neural activity are similar, pointing to convergent neurocognitive processing. Like your brains are playing the same tune section by section.
And what does this alignment, the same tune, tell us about how effective communication actually is?
Well, the insight here is pretty profound. Studies show that during natural conversation, brain activity synchronizes between the speaker and the listener. But here's where it gets really interesting. This synchrony isn't just delayed, like you reacting to what I just finished saying. It often happens in an anticipatory way.
Anticipatory? You mean the listener's brain is ahead of the game?
In a sense, yes. The listener's brain often starts firing in patterns that anticipate key concepts before the speaker even finishes the sentence.
Whoa, so the listener is literally getting ahead of the curve because their brain is kind of locked onto the speaker's frequency.
Precisely. And this anticipation isn't just some weird neurological quirk. It seems to be a direct indicator of how well information is being transferred. Greater neural synchrony correlates directly with better comprehension scores, higher levels of engagement. When the brains are truly on the same wavelength, so to speak, the information transfer is demonstrably cleaner, more efficient, less static, more signal.
Okay, that's the brain level resonance. Incredible. But this idea of coherence also goes beyond just neural pathways, right? It affects our physical bodies too, through something called physiological synchrony.
Yes, exactly. This is the non-neural body-based synchrony. It often happens automatically, kind of below the level of conscious awareness. We see this synchronization across various autonomic rhythms, breathing, skin conductance, but heart rate variability, or HRV, is one of the most studied.
Right. Most people know HRV in the context of stress, recovery, fitness trackers maybe. How does heart rhythm coherence connect to social interaction?
Well, HRV coherence itself refers to those smooth, rhythmic patterns in our heart rate. When that coherence synchronizes across different individuals, it's strongly linked to increased prosocial behaviors, things like cooperation, compassion, trust.
So our hearts literally get in sync.
The data suggests so. And the hypothesis here is actually quite dramatic. Some research suggests that the heart's powerful biomagnetic fields might be the primary way this physiological synchronization happens between people in a group.
Wait, so the heart itself, not just the brain, is broadcasting a kind of signal that others around it can pick up?
Essentially, yes. That's the idea being explored. The heart is the body's strongest source of rhythmic electromagnetic energy, and its field actually extends out beyond the body. Now, the definitive causal link is still theoretical in many contexts, but the observed synchronization of heart rhythms during group activities like shared meditation or even just effective teamwork suggests we might literally be resonating with each other at a core biological level, possibly mediated by these electromagnetic fields.
Okay, if the heart and brain are synchronizing, that has to tie directly into our emotional state, right? Creating a kind of emotional transfer between people.
It's really the foundation of what we call emotional contagion. We see this physiological synchrony in heart rate, skin conductance, breathing rate, in almost all interpersonal settings. Early psychoanalytic research, for instance, looked at patient-therapist pairs. They correlated changes in heart rate synchrony with moments of increased tension or breakthroughs in what they call transference. The body acts like a living seismograph of this shared emotional experience.
And you see it in our closest relationships too, right? Where that deep emotional knowledge can sometimes feel like a burden.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Take studies on married couples, for example. Researchers found that physiological linkage, basically, the relationship between the autonomic responses of the two spouses, was highly variable. But it peaked dramatically during conflict conversations.
During conflict. Interesting.
And here's the really crucial nuance. It was highest in the most dissatisfied marriages.
Wow, that's powerful. Why would the unhappiest couples show the highest level of physiological synchrony during a fight?
It suggests a really high level of what's called negative affect reciprocity. Dissatisfied couples tend to exhibit more potent negative emotions, anger, fear, resentment, and those emotions are inherently more physiologically activating than positive ones. So they become perfectly synchronized in their distress. They know exactly when the other person is experiencing high negative arousal because their bodies are basically vibrating at the same frantic frequency.
Oh man. So the tragedy is they have this perfect physiological knowledge of the other suffering, driven by synchrony, but they lack the cognitive empathy or maybe the communication strategy to use that knowledge constructively. They resonate with the chaos, not with finding a solution.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the most common automatic route of this whole emotional transfer often lies in something really simple, often involuntary: facial mimicry.
Ah, the automatic mirroring we do, even tiny movements around the eyes or mouth.
Yes. Our faces automatically, spontaneously mirror the emotional expressions of others, usually within milliseconds. So if you observe even a micro expression of fear on someone's face, it can trigger the same minute muscle contractions in your face.
And that feedback loop tells my brain something.
Exactly. That spontaneous mimicry sends rapid sensory feedback to your own brain, causing you to actually generate the associated emotional experience and the physiological pattern that goes with it. You don't just see their fear for a brief moment, you kind of feel their fear. It gives you these additional invaluable clues about the other person's internal state. You become a sensor for their frequency.
Okay. And this brings us right to the real-world consequence of trying to replace all this rich, nonverbal, physiological data with, well, superficial digital interactions. We lose that crucial vibratory coherence you mentioned.
That really is the cautionary tale of our digital age. We can look at that anecdote about Hiro, the team leader in Tokyo, trying to fix a critical software bug with Park, an engineer over in Seoul. They were doing it entirely via video conference.
Right, and they had perfect tech, didn't they? Clear, high-def 4K video, perfect audio. But the communication was just failing because Park was silent, staring blankly.
And Hiro, seeing this through a two-dimensional screen, interpreted Park's silence and stillness as, well, avoidance, maybe lack of motivation, or even incompetence. His frustration just kept building because that flat digital medium was completely failing to transmit the essential data, the vibratory coherence. The video showed a face, sure, but not the frequency underneath it.
So what did the in-person meeting finally reveal that the fancy 4K video completely missed?
When Hiro actually flew to Seoul, the shift was immediate, visceral. What the high-resolution camera totally obscured was that subtle but vital nonverbal data. Park's shoulders were slumped, his whole body language just screamed exhaustion, and his hands, which Hiro saw clearly for the first time, they were trembling slightly from burnout.
Oh, wow. He wasn't incompetent.
Not at all. He was vibrating with physical and emotional collapse.
And the physiological coherence was instantly restored just by being in the same room. Hiro's frequency immediately recalibrated based on Park's full physical signal. He didn't need words at that point. He just needed to recognize the burnout and, apparently, pour 2 cups of tea. The digital world gave him information, but it stripped away the raw sensory input needed for true resonance, for empathy.
The coherence was just lost in translation across the digital static. It really underscores that true understanding, especially when you're dealing with critical human states like burnout or high tension, relies so heavily on multisensory, often purely nonverbal signals that just get filtered out by our tech interfaces.
Okay, we've talked about how human bodies and brains achieve coherence. Now, let's zoom out dramatically. Let's consider how our environment itself affects us. We're moving from the microscopic neural synapses, heart rhythms, to the macroscopic, the ground beneath our feet. This leads us right into the fascinating and, often controversial realm of geobiology.
Right. Geobiology is presented as a discipline that studies the interactions between specific locations, natural energies present there, and the resulting well-being of the people occupying those spaces. It's founded on the idea that invisible environmental phenomena influence the, let's call it, energetic quality of spaces. It often contrasts itself with geopathy, which focuses specifically on disease or illness believed to be caused by these earth forces.
This concept feels instantly familiar in a way because it echoes so many ancient wisdom traditions from around the world, long before we had modern scientific architecture.
Absolutely. The core principles have really deep roots. You see them in traditions like Vastu Shastra in India, which has incredibly detailed principles for aligning buildings with natural elements and cosmic energies. And of course, Feng Shui in China, focusing on arranging spaces to channel energy flows or qi. These are ancient, complex frameworks for maximizing environmental coherence based on centuries of observation and spatial arrangement.
But when we approach this today, we really have to tackle that necessary distinction, right, between established science and, while sometimes effective marketing. A critical eye feels essential here.
That distinction is paramount, yes. Geobiology as a field often encompasses certain concepts that, frankly, lack recognized, repeatable, empirical validation from the broader scientific community at this point.
Like what, specifically?
This includes ideas about subtle Earth energy grids, sometimes called telluric networks, like the proposed Hartman and Curry lines, or detection methods like dowsing. While practitioners genuinely believe in their effectiveness, these methodologies are often subjective. So caution is definitely advised, especially as they are frequently leveraged quite heavily in wellness marketing and real estate consultations without definitive, objective scientific backing.
Okay, so where does the science actually align with architecture and measurable well-being? Where's the solid ground, so to speak?
The real point of convergence lies in fields like sustainable architecture and, more recently, neuroarchitecture. These fields rely exclusively on concrete, measurable data. Here, the focus is squarely on optimizing the aspects of the built environment that we know through empirical research impact our cognitive function and physical health.
So things we can actually measure and quantify.
Exactly. Things like maximizing natural light exposure, ensuring superior air quality and ventilation, controlling acoustics effectively, and using healthy, non-toxic, locally sourced building materials. These are proven factors.
And this is where we see the principles of biophilic design really coming to life, that core idea that humans just thrive when we're connected to nature.
Precisely. Biophilic design isn't just about, sticking a few potted plants in the corner. It's about intentionally embedding natural patterns, forms, and elements directly into the structure of a building to measurably minimize occupant stress and boost cognitive performance. It's pragmatic environmental resonance in action, based on things we can actually track.
And we have a fantastic real-world example of this kind of environmental coherence with the Kutek Puat Hospital KTPH in Singapore. How does its design actively push back against that typical sterile clinical hospital environment?
KTPH is really a masterclass in structural resonance. Most hospitals, let's face it, are sealed clinical boxes. They kind of cut patients and staff off entirely from the outside world. KTPH uses this distinctive V-shaped design, which ensures natural light and fresh air can permeate deep into the interior.
So it breathes, essentially.
It does. And gardens, terraces, water features, they're integrated at every single level, which means a nurse having a coffee break or a patient recovering in their room is constantly connected visually and physically to nature.
That seamless integration of the natural world, especially into such a high-pressure medical environment, must have an incredible impact on the people working and healing there.
It absolutely does. It fundamentally shifts the ambient frequency of the place. Staff retention rates at KTPH are noticeably higher than the Singapore national average for hospitals. And patient well-being metrics are consistently strong. The environment itself is designed to be restorative. By optimizing those measurable factors, light, air, connection to nature, the hospital structure is actively resonating with the human need for natural coherence, and it yields tangible results in things like staff morale, productivity, and even healing speed.
Okay, now let's circle back and dive into some of the strong claims made by certain geobiological practitioners regarding geopathic stress, which they define, as you said, as actual disease or illness caused by localized Earth forces. And they link it to some pretty massive societal and financial implications.
Yes. Geopathic stress practitioners claim that specific subterranean disturbances, typically running underground water, geological fault lines, or underground cavities, distort the Earth's natural electromagnetic field in a harmful way. They state that the friction created by, say, running water underground can increase these vibrations significantly, maybe up to 30 times, making them detrimental to health.
And the idea is continuous exposure is the problem.
Right. Continuous exposure in places where people spend a lot of time, like where their bed is placed or their main work desk, can supposedly compromise well-being over time, leading to things like chronic lethargy, sleep disturbances, and potentially contributing to more complex long-term diseases.
And these practitioners claim they've actually quantified this societal impact using specific case studies and sometimes non-conventional instruments.
That's correct. They often use instruments like the geomagnetometer or the ESMOG spin, which they say measure these subtle energy fields. For instance, there were studies done in Pune City, India, that attempted to map crime hotspots directly onto areas identified as having high geopathic stress.
Really? Crime hotspots, what was the correlation they reported finding?
Well, the readings allegedly showed high negative energy in areas that were already flagged by police as chronic crime hotspots, places like Lulanagar and Khandwa. Practitioners claimed their instruments registered signals indicating, quote, cosmic energy detrimental to mental strength, and telluric vibrations signaling financial weakness and antisocial thinking.
Wow.
The argument put forward was that high radiation units, as they measured them, emanating from these zones, were affecting residents' brain cells and somehow generating antisocial behavior.
And these claims extend beyond social issues like crime into things like infrastructure problems, specifically severe road accidents.
Yes. The Mumbai-Pune Expressway, which is unfortunately notorious for fatal accidents, was surveyed by one research team. They identified 7 critical high accident black spots, they call them. All 7 of those spots were reportedly situated directly on high geopathic stress zones they'd mapped. According to their report, yes. Their theory suggests that these zones somehow debilitate the physiological condition of drivers passing through them, maybe leading to sudden fatigue, distraction, or critical cognitive errors that then cause the crashes.
So the claim is the environment itself is vibrating at a frequency that actively undermines the human capacity for attention and focus at critical moments. And the research they present doesn't just stop at diagnosis, right? It extends to mitigation, using devices they call harmonizers.
Yes, they claim success in actually clearing these zones. We found reports citing crime data from Denver and San Diego in the U.S. where practitioners claim to have installed these harmonizers to clear the geopathic stress from designated city hotspots.
And what were the reported results?
They're striking, if accurate. Denver allegedly saw a 36% drop in crime in the first year after installation, followed by a claimed 51% decline in the second year. San Diego reportedly saw a 28% decline in drive-by shootings in the first year the project was active.
I mean, those figures are huge. They suggest an entirely unconventional approach to urban safety and planning if those claims could be robustly validated using standard scientific methodology. But maybe the most financially tangible claim relates to real estate feasibility and project development.
Yes, this specific piece of research focused on the Delhi National Capital Region in India, where apparently many high-profile real estate projects were stalled or facing massive delays. Researchers investigated the potential link between geopathic energy readings, compliance with traditional Vastu principles, and project success or failure.
And what did the quantitative data show?
It indicated a very clear correlation, according to their findings. A staggering 82% of the projects that were stopped completely or severely delayed were located in zones they measured as having high geopathic stress.
82%. That's a massive failure rate, supposedly linked to this environmental misalignment. What was the quantifiable financial cost they associated with that?
The descriptive statistics in that study showed that in these high-stress areas, the average delay for projects was around 18 months. That's compared to only about 7 months delay in areas identified as low stress. When developers had to deal with these extensive delays, the average financial losses claimed were substantial, roughly 40% of the initial projected cost of the entire project.
40% loss.
Yeah. So this study strongly suggested that overlooking these environmental factors, whether you interpret them through the lens of geopathic stress claims or simply traditional Vastu principles, carries a potentially severe economic penalty. It points to a very high cost of misalignment, however you define it.
It seems like whether we focus only on the pragmatic, clearly measurable elements of neuroarchitecture, light, air, acoustics, or we consider these less conventional yet quantitatively persuasive claims from geopathic practitioners, the underlying pattern feels undeniable. When systems are aligned, they just work better. Whether that system is a hospital building, a negotiation between two people, or a massive construction project.
That really is the core synthesis of everything we've touched on today, isn't it? The idea of resonance and coherence emerges as the single unifying variable across all these seemingly disparate phenomena, spanning just vast scales of existence.
Yeah.
We started way out at the macroscopic level with the environment, noting how the Earth's magnetic fields are claimed by some to affect our built structures, potentially causing real physical and financial costs due to misalignment. Then we moved inward to our own physiological responses, examining how heart rhythms and maybe even biomagnetic fields can coordinate a team or a couple, for better or worse.
And finally, we looked at the mental and strategic level, observing how quiet, authentic leadership like Maria in your story can cut right through organizational chaos simply by refusing to match the frantic frequency of all the noise around it.
The goal, it seems, is always the alignment of frequency. It's about ensuring all the interacting systems, the built environment, the human body, the collective mind of a team, are all vibrating on the clearest possible channel, reducing the static, maximizing the signal, getting into coherence.
The true measure of effectiveness, then, whether we're talking about achieving sustainable architecture or fostering authentic human connection and decisive leadership, seems to lie not in the loudness of the signal, but ultimately in the precision of the resonance.